This wasn't supposed to go viral. There was no shouting, no insults, no meltdown. But watch closely, because in the next few seconds, one calm response completely dismantles a confident TV personality on live air. Pete Hegseth came in loud. Jasmine Crockett came in ready. And what happened next is a masterclass in how real power actually works. It was supposed to be just another loud, predictable political TV debate, the kind viewers have seen 100 times before. Strong opinions thrown like punches, talking points repeated on autopilot, a lot of noise but very little substance. The set was brightly lit, the cameras perfectly positioned, and the panelists sat ready to perform their familiar roles. Everyone knew the script. One side would speak aggressively, the other would push back, voices would rise. The host would interrupt, the segment would end, and the audience would move on. Nothing memorable, nothing new. But within minutes, something unexpected happened. Something subtle at first, almost easy to miss, yet powerful enough to completely shift the room. As the cameras rolled and the discussion heated up, Pete Hegseth leaned forward in his chair with visible confidence. His posture said it all. He was comfortable, prepared, ready to dominate the conversation. He spoke fast and forceful, delivering his points with the certainty of someone used to controlling the narrative. His tone wasn't conversational, it was declarative, final. As if what he was saying didn't require debate, only acceptance. This was his environment. Live television rewards boldness. It rewards confidence. And most of all, it rewards volume. Pete knew that, and he played into it perfectly. He moved quickly from point to point, barely pausing between sentences. His words carried momentum, and momentum on live TV can be dangerous. It overwhelms. It pressures others into reacting emotionally instead of thinking clearly. For a moment, it looked like he had the upper hand. But then the camera cut to Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't scrambling to interrupt. She wasn't signaling frustration. She wasn't reacting at all. Jasmine Crockett sat still, listening carefully, eyes focused, expression calm. While Pete spoke, she did something rare in modern political television. She waited. No eye rolls, no sighs, no performative outrage, just patience. And that patience quietly changed everything. Because while Pete was speaking with confidence, Jasmine was listening with intention. She wasn't preparing a rebuttal based on emotion. She wasn't waiting for a pause to jump in with a slogan. She was dissecting his argument in real time. Every assumption, every exaggeration, every gap between claim and reality. As Pete continued, the energy in the room remained loud, but something underneath it began to shift. The longer he talked, the more space he gave her to respond. And he didn't seem to realize it. Then it happened. Pete finally paused. Not because he was finished, but because he expected someone else to react. Maybe an interruption. Maybe a challenge delivered with the same volume he had used. Instead, there was silence. A brief, uncomfortable silence. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, and when she finally spoke, the entire tone of the show changed. Her voice wasn't sharp, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't defensive, it was steady, measured, controlled. You could almost feel it, the pause, the stillness, the collective realization spreading across the studio that this wasn't going to go the way anyone expected. She didn't start with an attack. She didn't accuse. She didn't escalate. She started with clarity. She addressed his claims one by one, calmly explaining where they didn't line up with facts. She pointed out what was missing from his argument, not with sarcasm, but with precision. Each sentence landed softly yet firmly, like a weight being placed on the scale. The louder the moment had been before, the quieter it became now. Pete tried to interject. She kept going, not louder, just clearer. And that contrast, the difference between noise and control, was impossible to ignore. What followed wasn't shouting, it wasn't insults, it wasn't the usual televised clash designed for viral clips and partisan applause. It was a calm, calculated shutdown live on national television. Jasmine Crockett didn't overpower Pete Hegseth. She outpaced him intellectually. She slowed the conversation down, stripped it of theatrics, and forced it into a space where facts mattered more than confidence. And in that space, his argument couldn't survive. You could see it in his body language. The confidence that had been so visible moments earlier began to crack. He shifted in his seat. He repeated himself. He tried to pivot to safer ground, but the momentum was gone. The conversation was no longer his to control. The hosts noticed it too. They stopped interrupting. The panel went quiet. The studio, once buzzing with energy, now felt focused, almost tense. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was exposure. Jasmine continued. Not rushing, not posturing, explaining the real-world implications of the issue being discussed. She grounded the conversation in consequences, how policies affect real people, not abstract talking points. She wasn't trying to win an argument, she was trying to tell the truth, and that made all the difference. By the time the segment ended, the outcome was clear, not because someone declared a winner, but because the room had already decided. Within hours, clips of the exchange spread across social media. People replayed it again and again, not because it was dramatic, not because it was explosive, but because it was explosive, but because it was rare. Viewers commented on how composed she was, how prepared, how effective calm could be in a space designed for chaos. Some said she didn't raise her voice once and still dominated the conversation. Others wrote, "This is what real leadership looks like." Even critics acknowledged the same thing. Jasmine Crockett didn't just respond, she redirected the entire moment. And that's why this exchange mattered. In a media landscape obsessed with outrage, this moment stood out because it refused to participate in it. It showed that discipline can disarm aggression, that preparation can neutralize performance, and that sometimes the most powerful way to shut someone down is to let them speak first. Then calmly show everyone why they're wrong. Pete Hegseth came into the discussion swinging hard, not cautiously, not conversationally, hard. From the moment the cameras went live, it was clear he wasn't there to explore the issue, he was there to dominate it. His tone was assertive, his posture forward, his delivery sharp and deliberate. He framed the topic in bold, dramatic terms, choosing words that were designed less to inform and more to ignite. This wasn't a discussion in his mind. It was a performance. He leaned heavily into emotionally charged language, the kind that instantly divides an audience into sides. Every sentence carried urgency. Every phrase was structured to sound definitive, as if the debate had already been settled, and he was simply reminding everyone of the obvious. His argument followed a familiar and effective pattern. First, simplify the issue. Complex realities were reduced to clean, easy-to-digest statements. Nuance was brushed aside in favor of clarity that felt comforting, even if it wasn't accurate. The problem, he suggested, wasn't complicated, it was just being misunderstood by people with the wrong priorities. Then, question motives. Instead of focusing only on policy, he subtly cast doubt on the intentions of those who disagreed with him. He implied that opposing views weren't just mistaken, but driven by politics, ideology, or self-interest. It was a strategic move, one that shifts attention away from facts and towards suspicion. Finally, present himself as the voice of common sense. He positioned his perspective as practical, grounded, and obvious. The unspoken message was clear. If you disagreed, you weren't just wrong, you were out of touch. At first, it worked. The pace of his delivery made it difficult to interrupt. He moved quickly from point to point, barely allowing space for a response. His confidence filled the room, and confidence on live television can be disarming. It creates the illusion of authority, especially when delivered without hesitation. For a moment, it looked like he had the upper hand. He spoke over others, not aggressively but persistently. He redirected the conversation whenever it threatened to slow down. He projected certainty, the kind that often intimidates opponents into either reacting emotionally or retreating altogether. This is where many debates are decided. Someone responds too quickly, someone gets defensive, someone raises their voice, and the moment slips away. But underneath all that volume, all that momentum, there was a problem, one that wasn't immediately obvious, but deeply structural. His argument relied heavily on assumptions rather than facts. Claims were made broadly, without grounding. Connections were implied, not proven. The logic depended on shared beliefs instead of verified information. To a sympathetic audience, it sounded convincing. To a critical listener, it was fragile. And Jasmine Crockett noticed. While Pete spoke, Jasmine didn't react the way most people expect on live television. She didn't interrupt to correct him mid-sentence. She didn't signal frustration. She didn't rush to defend her position. She listened, carefully, intentionally. She let him finish every sentence, even when the temptation to jump in must have been strong. She allowed his argument to unfold completely, from beginning to end, without resistance. That decision alone changed the dynamic. Because while Pete was performing for the audience, Jasmine was analyzing the structure of what he was saying. She wasn't focused on tone, she was focused on substance. She wasn't preparing a rebuttal fueled by emotion. She was mapping out where the argument collapsed under scrutiny. Every assumption, every generalization, every leap in logic. She caught them all. To most viewers, it may have looked like patience. In reality, it was preparation. The studio energy stayed loud, but something subtle began to shift. Pete continued speaking with confidence, unaware that the space he was filling was also giving her time to respond with precision rather than reaction. Then, eventually, he paused. Not because he had concluded his argument, but because he expected a response. Maybe an interruption, maybe a sharp rebuttal, maybe a heated exchange. Instead, there was a brief moment of silence. And in live television, silence is powerful. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. Her posture changed, not aggressively, but deliberately. It was a small movement, almost understated, yet it immediately drew attention. When she began to speak, her voice was calm, steady, and controlled. No rush, no edge, no defensiveness. She didn't start by attacking Pete. She didn't accuse him of bad faith. She didn't challenge his character. She didn't mirror his intensity. She challenged his argument, point by point. She addressed his claims in the order he presented them, carefully explaining where they lacked evidence and where they oversimplified reality. She clarified what had been left out. She highlighted the consequences that his framing ignored. Her words were deliberate. Each sentence landed cleanly without excess. The clarity of her response slowed the entire conversation down. The room, once driven by speed and volume, became focused and quiet. Pete attempted to interject. She continued, not louder, just steadier. That contrast was striking. The more she spoke, the more exposed the weaknesses in his argument became. Not because she dramatized them, but because she didn't. By refusing to escalate, she forced the conversation into a space where facts mattered more than force. And in that space, his argument struggled to stand. His responses became shorter, less confident, more repetitive. The momentum he had built at the beginning of the segment had dissolved, not through confrontation, but through clarity. By the time Jasmine finished, the dynamic had completely flipped. Pete Hegseth had entered the discussion expecting to control it. Instead, he found himself responding. And that's when it became clear this wasn't just a strong rebuttal. It was a dismantling, calm, measured, undeniable, not because she overwhelmed him with noise, but because she let his argument speak long enough for its flaws to become visible to everyone watching. 3. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. That was the first thing people noticed. In a room where volume had just been used as a weapon, her calm felt almost disruptive. It cut through the noise more effectively than shouting ever could. While others might have matched aggression with aggression, Jasmine chose restraint, and that choice instantly changed the dynamic. She didn't attack Pete personally. No insults, no sarcasm, no dismissive gestures. She didn't question his character or his intentions. She didn't try to embarrass him. In fact, she did something far more powerful. She focused on the substance. She simply asked a question, not a dramatic one, not a rhetorical one. A precise question, carefully worded, intentionally framed. Pete answered. Then she asked another, and then another. Each question was calm, measured, and direct. None of them were rushed. None of them were emotional. And each one quietly exposed a gap in his argument, an assumption left unproven, a claim left unsupported, a conclusion that didn't quite follow from the facts. With every question, the room grew quieter. This wasn't confrontation. It was examination. She referenced real data-specific, verifiable information that grounded the discussion in reality rather than opinion. Numbers replaced narratives. Context replaced slogans. She didn't overwhelm the audience with statistics, but she used enough to make one thing clear. This wasn't guesswork. She pointed to actual policy consequences, not hypotheticals, not vague predictions. She explained what these policies meant for real people, how they affected communities, budgets, and everyday lives. She connected the abstract arguments being thrown around to concrete outcomes, the kind that don't disappear when the cameras turn off. She reminded viewers of facts that couldn't be waved away by emotion. Facts that didn't care how confident someone sounded. Facts that didn't bend to repetition. Facts that remained true no matter how loudly they were challenged. The shift was immediate. You could feel it, not just hear it. Pete tried to interrupt. It was almost instinctive. When control starts slipping, the natural reaction is to reclaim it to speed or volume. He jumped in, attempting to redirect the conversation back to familiar ground. But Jasmine kept going. Not louder, just clearer. Her voice stayed steady. Her pace didn't change. She didn't rush to finish before being cut off. She spoke as if she had all the time in the world, and that confidence in her own preparation made interruption ineffective. each sentence built on the last. She challenged his claims directly, explaining why they didn't line up with reality. She didn't say he was wrong and move on. She explained why the argument failed, where the logic broke down, where the evidence didn't support the conclusion. And then she went further. She explained how those claims ignored the real-world impact on everyday people, not in abstract terms, but in human ones. She talked about consequences that don't show up in sound bites, about decisions that affect families, workers, and communities long after a television segment ends. She reframed the issue from an ideological debate into a matter of responsibility, and the more she explained, the more uncomfortable the moment became. Not because she was being aggressive, but because she was being undeniable. This wasn't a back and forth anymore. This wasn't about who could land the sharpest line or score a viral moment. This wasn't even a debate. It was a lesson. The kind of lesson that unfolds slowly, where the audience begins to see the structure of an argument collapse in real time. The kind where confidence alone is no longer enough to carry the moment. Pete Hegseth, who moments earlier seemed so certain, now looked defensive. His posture shifted. His responses shortened. His tone changed. He repeated points he had already made, hoping repetition might restore authority. He pivoted to adjacent arguments, trying to regain footing. He reframed questions instead of answering them directly. All the classic signs. But none of it worked, because the frame had already been reset. Jasmine had moved the conversation away from performance and into accountability. Once that happens, there's no easy way back. Volume doesn't help. Speed doesn't help. Confidence without evidence doesn't help. Every attempt Pete made to reassert control only highlighted the contrast between them. On one side, urgency without grounding. On the other, clarity without emotion. And viewers noticed. The hosts noticed too. Interruptions became less frequent. The room stayed quiet longer between exchanges. The energy that once favored dominance now favored discipline. Jasmine never lost her composure, not for a second. No visible frustration, no sharp edge creeping into her voice. No shift toward theatrics. She stayed exactly where she was from the moment she began speaking, calm, focused, and in control. That consistency mattered, because it signaled something deeper than just winning an exchange. It signaled preparation, confidence rooted in knowledge rather than performance, a willingness to let facts do the heavy lifting. By the time the segment moved on, the outcome was already clear. Not because someone declared a winner, but because the audience had watched the transformation happen in real time. Pete Hegseth didn't lose control because he was shouted down. He lost it because the conversation no longer revolved around his framing. Jasmine Crockett had already rewritten the terms of the discussion, and she did it without raising her voice, without attacking personally, and without losing her composure for even a second. That's what made the moment unforgettable. Not the tension, not the conflict, but the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were talking about and trusted that clarity would speak for itself. For you could see it on the faces in the studio, not shock, not outrage. Recognition. The hosts, who moments earlier had been quick to jump in, suddenly stopped interrupting. Their body language changed. They leaned back. They listened. The rapid-fire rhythm of the segment slowed, as if everyone in the room understood that something different was happening. The panel went quiet, not awkwardly quiet, focused quiet, the kind of silence that signals attention rather than discomfort. No one rushed to fill the space. No one tried to steal the moment. The conversation had found a center, and it wasn't chaos. The energy shifted. This wasn't the fiery clash producers usually hope for. There were no raised voices, no viral insults, no headline-ready outbursts. Instead, something far more powerful took over the room: clarity. The noise had faded, and in its place was understanding. The argument no longer felt abstract or performative. It felt grounded, real, the kind of moment that doesn't need theatrics to be memorable. Even the cameras seemed to linger differently. Instead of cutting rapidly between speakers, they held longer shots. Faces listening, reactions forming. The production itself appeared to slow down, responding to the change in tone. When clarity enters the room, everything else adjusts. By the time the segment ended, it was clear this wasn't just another debate that would be forgotten by the next news cycle, and the internet proved it. Within hours, clips of the exchange flooded social media. Short segments, extended cuts, side-by-side comparisons. People replayed the moment again and again, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it showed something rare on live television: discipline and preparation beating volume and bravado. In a media environment trained to reward the biggest reaction, this moment did the opposite. It rewarded restraint. It rewarded knowledge. It rewarded someone who didn't rush to dominate the conversation, but instead guided it. That difference stood out immediately. Comment sections lit up. Not with the usual partisan shouting, but with something closer to analysis. Viewers dissected the exchange frame by frame, pointing out where the argument turned, where the tone shifted, where control quietly changed hands. Some viewers said, "She didn't just shut him down, she exposed the weakness in his argument." Others wrote, "This is how you debate. Calm. Facts. No nonsense." What made those comments notable wasn't just the praise, it was where it came from. People across the political spectrum weighed in. Even viewers who openly disagreed with Jasmine politically admitted the same thing. She won that exchange, not by force, not by volume, not by performance, but by substance. That acknowledgement mattered. Because in polarized spaces, agreement is rare. When people who don't share the same views still recognize effectiveness, it signals that something genuine happened, something that cut through ideology and landed on principle. Clips were shared with captions like, "Watch closely," or "This is how it's done." Others highlighted the contrast, one side pushing hard, the other staying calm. One side repeating points, the other unpacking them. The moment became a reference point, not just for that show but for debates in general. Political commentators picked it up next. Analysts replayed the segment, pausing at key moments to explain why the exchange worked the way it did. They pointed out how the dynamic shifted when Jasmine stopped reacting and started reframing. They talked about pacing, about tone, about preparation. They noted how quickly the power balance changed once facts entered the conversation without theatrics attached to them. This wasn't a viral moment built on outrage. It was built on competence, and that's why it lasted. Days later, the clip was still circulating, still being discussed, still referenced in conversations about media, debate culture, and how public discourse has evolved. People weren't asking who yelled louder. They were asking, why did that work? And the answer kept coming back the same way. Because clarity creates authority. Because calm disarms chaos. Because preparation exposes performance. Jasmine Crockett didn't win the moment by humiliating her opponent. She won it by refusing to play the game as it was usually played. She didn't match aggression with aggression. She sidestepped it entirely. That approach resonated with viewers who were tired of the same cycle. Tired of noise. Tired of talking points. Tired of debates that felt more like theater than substance. For many, this exchange felt like a reminder of what these conversations could be. What they're supposed to be. Not a contest of volume, but an exchange of ideas. Even critics had to acknowledge it. Some tried to downplay the moment, others reframed it. But few denied its impact. The evidence was everywhere in the shares, the comments, the continued discussion. This wasn't just a clip people watched once and moved on from, it stuck. Because it offered something different. In a media landscape driven by outrage, this moment proved that there's still an audience for discipline, for preparation, for someone who can stand their ground without raising their voice. And that's why this exchange mattered. Not because it changed minds overnight, but because it showed a different way forward. A way where substance still matters, where clarity still wins, and where sometimes the most powerful moment on live television isn't the loudest one, it's the quiet one that makes everything else fall into place. This wasn't just another viral TV clip. It didn't explode because of a shocking insult or a dramatic meltdown. It didn't rely on outrage, humiliation, or a perfectly timed soundbite. In a media environment flooded with moments designed to disappear as quickly as they appear, this one stayed. Because it was a reminder. A reminder that shouting doesn't equal strength. Volume can create the illusion of power, but it can't replace substance. Loud voices may dominate a moment, but they rarely withstand scrutiny. When the noise fades, what remains is the argument itself, and without a solid foundation, it collapses. It was also a reminder that confidence without facts cannot survive pressure. Confidence is persuasive, but only when it's backed by reality. When it isn't, it becomes fragile. The moment it's questioned, the cracks appear. No amount of repetition can hold an argument together if it isn't grounded in truth. And perhaps most importantly, it was a reminder that preparation still matters. In an age of instant reactions and viral takes, preparation can feel old-fashioned, but moments like this prove it's still the most powerful tool in the room. Preparation allows someone to stay calm when others rush. It allows clarity when others lean on chaos. Jasmine Crockett didn't dominate the conversation by overpowering Pete Hegseth. She didn't try to outtalk him. She didn't try to outshout him. She didn't try to intimidate him. She outthought him. She listened carefully, responded deliberately, and trusted that the strength of her argument would speak for itself. Instead of reacting emotionally, she responded strategically. Instead of matching aggression with aggression, she changed the tempo entirely. She showed something important. You don't have to raise your voice to command attention. You don't have to perform outrage to be persuasive. You don't have to win the room by force. You just have to be ready. Ready with facts. Ready with context. Ready with the confidence that comes from knowing your material. In a media landscape built on outrage and noise, this moment stood out because it refused to follow the script. It didn't give producers what they usually hope for. It didn't deliver chaos. It delivered clarity. And clarity is disruptive. It disrupts the expectation that debates must be combative to be compelling. It disrupts the idea that the loudest voice deserves the spotlight. It challenges the assumption that attention can only be earned through conflict. By refusing to play the usual game, Jasmine changed the rules. She shifted the conversation away from personality and toward substance, away from performance and toward accountability, away from spectacle and toward meaning. That's why people are still talking about it. Not because they were told to, not because it was pushed relentlessly, but because it resonated. Viewers recognized something familiar in that moment, something many feel has been missing from public discourse. A sense of seriousness, a sense of responsibility, a sense that the conversation actually mattered. This wasn't entertainment pretending to be debate. It was debate reminding people why it matters. And that's why this moment will be remembered. Not as a shouting match, not as a viral insult, not as a clip designed to divide, but as a masterclass in control, credibility, and calm authority. It showed what happens when someone walks into a chaotic space without fear of it, when someone trusts preparation over performance, when someone understands that real power doesn't need to announce itself loudly. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't the loudest one, it's the smartest. And in that moment, on live television, that truth became impossible to ignore. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to follow more moving stories like this and turn on notifications to stay up to date.